Hello and welcome to the Give Me the Remote podcast. This is episode 20. This is the 13th of November 2018. My name is John and I am joined, as is our custom in the pod, by Sheridan.
G'day.
What are you doing there, Sheridan?
What do you mean?
On your phone.
I'm just researching. Last minute researching.
Okay, and what are we talking about?
Well, let's talk about Last Kingdom. Which
Last Kingdom, yes.
Frantically Googling now because I can't really remember what happened in season 2.
Now, this show is season 3 is coming out on the 19th of November. So we're because we have watched the first 2 seasons, we thought we'd give you a preview. A review of the first 2 seasons to set you up to make a decision as to whether you want to watch the 3rd season.
Yes.
And this is the one that you always think is Vikings.
I do, but I haven't actually watched Vikings, so it's kind of... Well, maybe that's why I think it's Vikings.
Yeah, it does have Vikings in it, though.
It does, yes.
So, why don't you tell us some more about it?
Well, it's based on a series of novels by Bernard Cromwell that I haven't read, but apparently are quite good.
I've got friends who are big fans of these books.
Yeah. So I understand that they're sort of a mixture of historically accurate material and made-up material, given that
the setting is accurate and the characters are some of the characters are fictional and some are historical.
Yes, they're set in like 4th century Anglo-Saxon England.
Later than that, I think.
Is it?
Yeah.
I'm not very good on the history.
Yeah, Vikings, 8th century maybe.
8th century, okay. Well, I feel as though that's in the wheelhouse.
Come on! Hundreds of years! All of Australia was only settled by white people 200 years ago.
Roughly.
Yeah. A bit like a Viking invasion.
So it follows a character called Uhtred.
Uhtred.
Who I understand is actually an amalgamation of several real life people named Uhtred. Mm-hmm. I think there was a crap ton of them around roughly the 4th to 8th century.
I think it was very close to Fred in its day.
Right. And, he's just battling Danes, battling English.
I mean, he is that annoying thing that, he's the prince who lost his kingdom and must reclaim his kingdom. And as we've discussed in this podcast, that's not a narrative I find particularly attractive, but it's a very common one in heroic stories, so I just have to live with it.
He's a bit of a chosen one, sort of, but
he does have the magic sword with the amber pommel, so, he's all set up.
King Alfred's in there, he's real.
Yep, King Alfred's real. I think it's a good depiction of King Alfred. I thought they kind of muffed the cakes, and Alfred is worthy of a show of his own, because he's a very interesting macro-historical character. Yeah. But he's portrayed as a sneaky Machiavellian, but
I think he's played
fundamentally
pretty well.
Decent. And there's no way the real King Alfred achieved what he did in terms of stopping the onslaught of the Vikings or the Danes, depending on how you want to describe them, and setting up what became what is now the current crown of England. They trace their line back to the Kingdom of Wessex. So, he must have been a pretty clever, sneaky dude to achieve all that from quite a weak position when he took over.
Yeah.
With the help from Uhtred.
And that's really what the first season's about. I feel as though the second season becomes a little bit convoluted and I can't really remember what it was about, and it was just really a bunch of, battle scenes and bodice ripping.
There's a lot of killing Vikings and fighting Vikings.
Yeah.
But they did settle most of the main narrative drive in season 1, and then season 2 is just, Bernard Cromwell writing his book was like, people bought a lot of those books, I'll write another one with Uhtred,
It had a feeling to me like they didn't really think they were going to get past making the first season.
Could be.
Yeah.
Now, one of the interesting things with this show is that the history is actually quite good, and the historical setting is quite good, and it's so quite good that YouTube pedants delight in finding the things they've got wrong, which is in its way a little homage that they, are just picking out the things that were wrong because so much of it is actually right. But yes, swords on the back and people wearing leather, probably not true. They were all wearing wool. They didn't wear their swords on their backs.
I felt it suffered a little from Game of Thrones wannabeism.
Oh, it's definitely Game of Thrones wannabeism.
But, you know, and I find this really frustrating when shows try to do this because you really can't be Game of Thrones unless you have a really, really big budget. And maybe they thought that they could because they had some...
The budget wasn't huge.
True, and they had some good source material in this show.
It's a good book.
Which, like the Game of Thrones novels. And I think that's why season 1 is good. It's because it obviously comes from very good source material.
Yeah, and I mean, The Witcher is coming out next year, I think, which is based on one of the better sets of books that I've never read.
Is it based on books, is it?
Yeah.
I only thought it was based on the game.
Well, the game is based on the books, and Sheridan's a big fan of the game. We won't talk too much about why she's a big fan of the game. But the really cool thing was that the guy who wrote the books, this Polish games company came to him and said, we want to make a game. Can we write you in for a percentage of the royalties? And he was like, nah, your game's not going to work. No one wants to play your game. Just give me some cash and we're out. So even though they desperately tried to put in for the royalties, and it's a multi-billion-dollar business now, the Witcher games, he cut himself out of the deal despite their protestations. So it's nice that Netflix has come along and given him a pile of money to get the TV rights.
Yeah, right.
But so we're talking sword and sorcery, fantasy. There's a little bit of sorcery in Last Kingdom, but it's more just mud and swords.
Which, to be honest, I think that's what you needed to do if you're going to stay close to being what is essentially meant to be a vaguely historically accurate drama. It's
not a criticism. I think they carried it off well.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of intrigue and national identity, and
it's a really interesting period of history that I think, well, I mean, you just kind of forget that the Danes were there.
They're still there.
They are actually up in Orkney, so I've been up there.
Well, Yorkshire. Yeah. Okay, so in general, we're saying if you haven't watched Last Kingdom and you've got some time in your viewing schedule, fire up season 1. You've got soon coming up 3 seasons. It's a little poor man's Game of Thrones, but we are still a long way away from getting another season of Game of Thrones. So if that's what you like, give it a go, I reckon.
I reckon I would give season 1 4 stars and season 2 3 stars.
Yeah, I would give 3.5 stars overall because I can do half stars because I have that magic power.
Well, I don't like combining all the series together
I can combine seasons too.
I'm a purist.
Yeah, you're a purist, so you're giving a split score, which evens out to my combined score.
Well, I'm not sure that's correct, actually.
So, I think we're basically saying it's a 3.5 star show, but if you want to see Vikings and Saxons doing horrible things to each other, and there's quite a bit of sex as well, isn't there?
Oh, yeah, Uhtred gets his kid off quite a bit.
Uhtred gets around, yeah.
Yeah, he's not too bad to look at coming out of a little...
a dell or a...
lake or whatever he...
Not coming out of a dell, I might add. Coming out...
bathing in a...
Yeah, coming from bathing in a dell. I don't think the budget in this show stretches to a dell, let alone sex scenes.
No.
Alright then. So what's next?
Well, if we're going to stick with English history, let's go to Outlaw King.
Mm-hmm. People swinging swords around, lots of facial hair.
Yeah.
More chainmail, which is historically accurate because it's 300 years later.
Yeah, definitely have a lot more like 300. Houses and stuff. They got a lot more stuff.
Yeah, they're building stuff out of stone, not out of wood, as much in the royal cities, because bear in mind this is all these things focus around the doings of the rich. But, yeah.
It was about Robert the Bruce.
Robert the Bruce, yes.
I feel as though it's a fairly picked over area of history, but...
I disagree. I can't honestly think of a movie about Robert the Bruce that's been done in 30 years. Really? William Wallace was done and had Robert the Bruce... But even that was a while ago. And Robert the Bruce was a minor character in that because Robert the Bruce sort of came to power and eventually became King of Scotland in the aftermath of the events in Braveheart. Which I feel Braveheart's actually held up surprisingly well as a movie.
Well, I haven't rewatched it, so I can't vouch for that, but I imagine it probably has.
It was sort of at the very start of the modern era of cinema and had the benefit of modern production values, I feel.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Anyway, Outlaw King, Chris Pine, looking a bit.
I did not recognise Chris Pine, I have to say.
He looked fuzzy and stupid throughout, so he matched. I thought he was.
But when I found out that it was Chris Pine, I wasn't that surprised because I don't think he's a very good actor. I think he's really just a.
It's not that pretty a face anymore either. It's sort of craggy and fuzzy in this one.
Yeah, but he's there for taking his shirt off and looking at you with those blue eyes, isn't he?
I don't think he looked that good with his shirt off either. There was some good shirt off action in this film. I'll give you that, but I didn't think it was him particularly. Yeah.
The other actor, you thought there was some better ones in there?
I don't know. Just vague memories of homoerotic fantasies going on.
But it was directed by a Scottish director, and apparently when he showed this film at the Toronto International Film Festival, there was some mixed reviews, and he cut the 2.5-hour film down to 2 hours. Which is a funny thing because when we all watch, I have to say, when I started watching this, I actually thought it was a TV show.
Right.
And
you got really surprised when
well,
it was still
you
going
said to me,
without a break.
let's watch Outlaw King, and I found myself an hour and a half in thinking, I'm still captivated by this. This is a really great TV show.
The pacing is amazing.
If they keep this up, and then I realised, oh no, I'm watching a movie.
Because they weren't stretching the material to 10 episodes,
exactly,
which we've been critical of.
I mean, yeah, this is my main problem with Netflix, of whatever this magical 10 episodes they have is. I mean, this is a Netflix original film as well.
Which means they couldn't get a cinematic distribution for it.
Well, but then they distribute. Well, how does that work though? If you
generally
premiere at a film festival,
if a movie generally, and I can't say it happened here, I haven't looked into that. Generally, if a movie can't pick up a distribution deal, remember that it costs a lot of money to distribute a film. Yeah, there's a huge marketing budgets. If all the people who might want to do that pass, then Netflix tends to swoop in and buy it and just shove it out there. Because it costs very little for Netflix to market to us because we've got the app on our phone going bing, 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 we'll think you like this movie.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I thought the last half of the movie was weak to risable to terrible.
Yeah, it definitely stays pretty good for just past the hour kind of mark.
Yeah, and then it gets very confusing. If it's had a troubled production,
very
troubled
confusing.
editing,
I found it very hard to follow the storyline towards the end.
It just felt rushed. Oddly, because we were saying how great the pacing was in the first half of the film.
Yeah.
But,
and then they just sort of, I mean, admittedly what they do to alleviate that confusion is to just throw a medieval battle scene at you, which is pretty entertaining. They're good battle scenes.
It's a good battle scene, but it does end confusingly and weirdly where they have the English king at their mercy and they just sort of let him throw up a bunch of bile and run away.
Yeah, it's very...
And they don't quite explain what their motivations are. It could be that, we've beaten him, he won't want to come back at us, and in historically having been beaten at the bat, he was beaten. I've seen no record of him being briefly tortured by Scots before they let him go, which is what, spoilers, happens in the movie.
I think you're allowed to give away spoilers
for
when
historical.
It's historical. I actually thought the more interesting character was Elizabeth de Burgh. Is it de Burgh?
I don't know. That was the wife?
The wife.
She was really cool.
I know, but apparently, so I googled her after. Apparently, very little's known of her. I think she was Edward the First's daughter or something. But anyway, she was the wife, played very well by Florence Pugh.
Yeah. The trouble was they stuck her in a bastion, in a sort of a oubliette, a cage hung over the cliff, and then just sort of left her there.
Yeah, I feel like I would want a movie about her.
Yeah, or what was happening, or how she survived, or whether she was okay there, or whether she wasn't, or any of what was going on there. But but that comes down to the last half hour of the film has just problems multiplying, having put together a very good film up until then. It just sort of goes bleh.
So what are you giving it?
I reckon it's a bare 3 stars.
Yeah, I'm going to give it 3 stars, and mainly because I thought that I think the first hour especially is quite well paced and interesting, and I was really drawn into the characters, and also the battle scenes are amazing. They don't feel overly CGI.
Yeah, they're not super huge.
There's a lot of horses in this show,
and horses getting hurt, which is very rare.
Yeah, which I mean, that would have cost them a lot of money to do that, because you rarely see that anymore.
You assume it was all CGI because there's no way you could make a movie where horses are actually getting hurt. People would burn the set down.
But I think you rarely see it now because it's such probably a pain in the ass to film. But if you're going to be historically accurate, you really have to have it that way, and they did.
There was a question on that because horses were expensive and reasonably pliable if they were captured, so there definitely was an emphasis on knocking the man off the horse rather than just killing the horse. So horses being valuable meant they were not a natural target of attack, but if you're desperately defending your life, you're just going to hit whatever you can hit. And that seems to be where they go with this. So not a perfect movie, not even a great movie, but an okay movie. And I like the history of Robert the Bruce. They left out the spider story in this. They just had a reference to a spider very briefly to give fan service to those of us who were into that story. But
it was definitely there.
It was there, but
maybe it was drawn to my attention by you.
I'm a big fan of the spider story.
All right, well... All right. What's next?
Skyscraper. Dwayne Johnson. A mashup of Die Hard and The Towering Inferno.
So, just to be clear, the plot of this film is Dwayne Johnson trying to get up a skyscraper to save his family. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, but except his wife ends up on the ground having to rescue him as well.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying... There's obviously complicated things that occur with the skyscraper, but he's essentially just trying to get up a skyscraper.
Look, it's Dwayne Johnson doing Die Hard, basically, with more fire. Yeah. And a running gag on IT that, you can fix everything by turning it off and on again. I mean, talking about Chekhov's gun, I mean, they just put that out there and you knew it was going to resolve everything.
It happens very early on. So, Neve Campbell plays The Rock's wife. I haven't seen her for a while.
I've always liked Neve Campbell, and I liked her in this too.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought every single person in this was just very, very mediocre.
Oh, Neve Campbell was no better than she's ever been, but she's just likeable. Ditto The Rock. Just likeable.
I didn't think The Rock was as likeable in this as he usually is.
He's getting old. He's a bit craggy. He's got the beard, grey in the beard.
This film, it's set in Hong Kong, and there's these sort of amazing... It's basically this amazing futuristic skyscraper that's like next level skyscraper with crazy security systems and
all sorts of crazy, as in you would never do it, things going on.
There's like a hall of mirrors thing where
some vertical wind turbines that serve no real purpose except just to spin around sometimes, not all the time, just when it suits the plot.
Yeah. And there's this hall of mirrors thing where you can stand like on top of Hong Kong because it reflects what's underneath.
No, it doesn't reflect, it transducts.
I'm not getting into the science of it.
There is no science. It's all make-believe. But it's totally unnecessary. It serves no actual purpose. It's just a thing. There's a lot of it.
Well,
in
you
this
see,
film.
this
Things
is the
they put
thing,
in there
though,
that
John.
don't do
The
anything.
thing is, John, I found out that it did serve a purpose.
What was the purpose?
It was originally a real 3D movie. And
Right.
once you find out that this was a 3D movie, lots of things are explained, aren't they?
Why they keep having the turbines whizzing around when they need to, because that would just look cool.
Well, why you just keep looking at people... Because I said to you when I was watching this film, because I'm a bit afraid of heights, and there was a few moments, like he gets on a crane and there's crazy shit going on.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm like scared of heights right now. And can you imagine what that would have been like if you were in the cinema?
It was vertiginous, is what you were trying to say.
I don't know what vertiginous means.
It gives you vertigo.
Yeah, but it really would have given you...
Vertigo. So it's vertiginous.
If you were in the cinema watching it in 3D.
Yes, indeed.
So a whole bunch of shots suddenly make a lot of sense.
Even on our TV, it succeeded in giving you vertigo.
It did.
That's a success to the filmmaking. So there are moments of technical filmmaking brilliance. It's very well done on a lot of levels. The story is crap.
And you know what the thing that's really lacking is they don't have a very good villain.
Is that mercenary? Well, he's basically a reprise of Alan Rickman in Die Hard, isn't he?
He's a rubbish Alan Rickman.
He's a rubbish Alan Rickman. Everyone is trying to be Alan Rickman as a rubbish.
I feel as though that's like spitting on Alan Rickman's grave, actually, even comparing the two.
I mean, Jeremy Irons is still going around. You'd have thought they could get him for this.
I think he's really old now.
He still would have been better, wouldn't he?
I think it's Roland Mueller guy. Mueller? German actor. Who was the villain.
Yeah.
But he's hardly even in any movies. But it was quite successful at the box office. I think it cost 120 million to make and opened with like, I don't know, 200 million. Made like 50 million on opening weekend in China.
Well, that's the
which
whole
is
thing.
a common
Set
thing
it
now.
in China,
you
you make a lot of money in China.
Which is, that's great. And I think if we're going to see more Chinese actors,
yeah,
great too. I don't think a lot of them...
If we're going to talk industry metrics, I used to work in cinemas a long time ago, and a rule of thumb was that only 1 in 8 movies made a profit at the box office. Cinematic release was generally, back then, and the economics have changed hugely since.
Massively.
But back then the economics were based around cinematic release was mostly a promotion for DVD release or VHS release. Rental release, shall we call it, in that era. So, it didn't need to make money. A movie that makes money at the box office in first release is a unicorn. It's a rare and wonderful thing in the world of cinema.
Well, so anyway, this is a unicorn.
Yeah. But anything...
So it's a little bit different now, obviously, but...
Yeah, if it makes it to cinematic release, it's already a wonderful thing. But, as we've discussed before, Dwayne Johnson is just charming and nice, and everyone likes seeing his films.
I think this... I've said it's mediocre, but the thing about it is that there's not really many boring moments. You know what you're going to get. You're getting yourself some... Turn your brain off... Watch Dwayne Johnson.
The villain's motivations, even when you get to the end of the movie, are entirely
unclear. Who knows?
opaque.
I don't even care.
Yeah.
I don't even know if the dude who built the building was a villain. I couldn't remember. He seemed vaguely evil.
He's a super wealthy dude, so he is evil. You don't get that much money without being evil. Let's be honest. Bring on the revolution. Burn them. Eat them. But yeah. Anyway.
So what are you giving it?
3.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a reluctant 3, but 3 nonetheless. And if you like Dwayne Johnson, if you like Skyscrapers, if you like Die Hard, but you just... You know what it's like? It's like if you wanted to eat a steak and the steak was Die Hard, but all you had was like, I don't know... Actually, I don't eat red meat, so this is a stupid analogy for me to be making. If you wanted to go from like... king prawns to the crappy ones in the Aldi freezer.
Let's say Die Hard is a big steak. This is a smaller steak, but it's still a steak.
Well, I was going to say Die Hard's like a king prawn, and this is like one of those swamp
Die Hard
prawns
is
that
a
you buy in the Aldi.
Die Hard is a lobster, and this is a Balmain bug.
Balmain bugs are way better than lobster.
No way.
They are.
Anyway, the point is, it's a poor man's Die Hard, but let's face it, we've all seen Die Hard so many times that we don't need to see it ever again. We just close our eyes and it washes across our brains. So here we have something like Die Hard, but new and with The Rock. And frankly, I'd rather watch The Rock right now than Bruce Willis.
John's so animated.
Yeah, I'm really
throwing
animated.
Glasses around.
Ooh, didn't break though.
Guess we've already rated it. We're done now.
Well done.
What's next, or what's not next?
Well, what we're talking about next is House of Cards Season 6. And this is the first for this show. It's a show we haven't watched and we don't intend to watch.
So why aren't you going to watch it?
Well,
you tried. You were real close.
I'm not watching it because you don't want to watch it and because I don't have the spare time in my life to find the hours to watch it when you don't want to watch the television.
You find your time to watch all these sorts of random YouTube videos.
And Doctor Who, but these are things I really want to watch. And I cram them into the few moments that I have to myself. And I don't have time for House of Cards in that period, which I'm happy to talk to. But I think you should talk through why you watched the first 5 seasons of House of Cards and you don't intend to watch the 6th.
Well, I have to say I was pretty much on the way out in Season 5 because I thought it just got really, really stupid.
I thought Season 5 was something of a return to form after a really flat 3 and 4.
Actually, yeah, that's probably fair. It got a little bit better, but I was done then. Like, I was so done.
I think a general problem with the show is that it was much better when Frank Underwood was clawing his way to power than it was being a procedural about this is the life of the president.
And I also found this storyline of Claire becoming president to be just a bit ridiculous.
Well, it was kind of modelled on the Clintons, I think.
Except that
she does
Hillary
have some resemblance to Hillary, doesn't she?
But Hillary was a senator for many, many years.
They're compacting the timeline.
But she went from zero to hero.
Okay, but the point is that the Underwoods are a allegory for the Clintons.
You think?
It's a loose allegory. But
yeah, I guess so.
There's a lot going on there. I would also say, if we're going to talk about House of Cards, that the English series from the late 80s doesn't have the budget or the spectacle, but in terms of the writing and the characters and the story, it was pretty spectacular, and I would recommend it to people. Having said that, certainly the first 2 seasons of this are also amazing, and Kevin Spacey, whatever else we want to say about him, and we better say some more about him, has always been a sensationally good actor, and his role, particularly in the early seasons, as Frank Underwood with his turns to Canberra, where he confides in the audience the darkness of his soul, and then turns back into the charming Southern senator when it suits him to be charming, and turns back into the real son of a bitch when it suits him to be that. It's a masterclass in acting. I think everyone should watch the first 2 seasons of House of Cards.
Oh, the first 2 seasons are great. So, obviously, everyone must know why the season 6 is so controversial, is because Kevin Spacey's been accused of all sorts of sexual misconduct, and probably the worst reason to come out as a homosexual was, I'm sorry, the reason that I abused a young male actor is because I'm actually gay.
Well, he was out as a homosexual sometime before.
No, he was not. He was not. He
okay.
came out.
Look, I also think the way Hollywood reacted, what's been in the public gaze, and this is just a suspicion, must be a tip of a very large iceberg. Because particularly the movie All the Money in the World, to have so close to release, reshot all his scenes as a lead.
I know.
That is a ferocious reaction, and the things he's been publicly accused of don't quite match up to this reaction of reshooting a major feature and cutting him out of the story of a show that he was the heart and soul of.
Oh, and this is actually the thing, is I actually think, what's the point of continuing this show? Why bother?
Well, a lot of people had their livelihoods tied up in the show, I guess, and they wanted to give it a crack. Good luck to them.
Yeah, I know, but it's not going to... Maybe we should watch it to see if it does work. No
one I know who's watched it thinks it's working.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to work. He's an executive producer, actually, on it, so that's... how does that even work?
He must have had money in a contract. They couldn't get rid of him on that one. That's the only thing I could assume there. But
well, he's been an EP since the beginning, so... Yeah. But, anyway, but it does... there's definitely a conversation, obviously, occurring about what happens with these actors now that have been...
Isn't it amazing that the gay man's the first to be rubbed out of the Me Too movement? But, you know,
I think... Yeah, well, no, I think there is an argument to that, but... Harvey Weinstein, I think, has been very ceremoniously wiped out. I think both of them are living quite comfortable lives despite being wiped out. But
that is part of the problem, that a checkout clerk at Walmart who loses their job is facing absolute ruin, whereas any of these people, it's just
might have to sell a Ferrari.
It's a loss of prestige at worst to them. And that's a structural inequality.
And I'm sure they still do have actually influence and a certain degree of power within their own communities.
They would have suffered a loss of power, which can sting, but it's a sting, not a body blow, the way real hardship is to other people. Yeah. Anyway, so that's why we're not watching House of Cards, but we would absolutely recommend watching the first 2 seasons. And if you really...
Well, this is actually the interesting thing, though. And I have to say, I'm probably... probably betraying my feminist positioning, in that I will still watch Woody Allen movies and enjoy them. It doesn't sit as comfortably when I do that as what they did the first time. We did the first time around when I watched them. But what do you do with these shows that? And there's actually a lot of content in the first 2 seasons of House of Cards that is eerily similar to the accusations that have been levelled against him, because Frank is bisexual in this show and commits some questionable...
Well, he commits murder.
Yeah, but there's also, he has an affair with someone who's in his employ, and it starts to become a bit of life imitates art. And how do you process that now that you've come to know these new facts about the real person?
Look, fundamentally, it doesn't matter how much of an absolute creep Kevin Spacey is. I'm not going to resolve from the fact that The Usual Suspects is one of the best movies ever made.
Yeah, see, I mean, I've never been I think it's a very good movie. It doesn't rate in my top 10 at all.
Okay, but anyway, the point is, Kevin Spacey was, and will remain a very good actor, and has played a lot of very good roles.
I know, but what I'm saying though is, when do you start to distance yourself from content that is so similar to the real life abuse of power?
It's a bit like Louis C.K. talking about all the horrible
things
he
like,
did.
when do you stop? Like, it's such a difficult question. That as an audience member, you don't want to be complicit in that behaviour, but at one point, like, I mean, I love Woody Allen movies, but you watch them now and you're like, it's a bit cringeworthy.
I think we've talked about this before, in that, and we talked about it in particular with Glow, that they did quite a good job there in depicting people who do bad things. The bad thing they do is not the sum total of their life. And that's a very adult understanding of the world to come to, is you can't write off anyone's entire life based on one bad thing they do, or even a number of bad things they do, because there will be, in anyone's life, a number of good things they do as well. There's very few...
I know, but obviously the problem with this is the problem, is that the Me Too movement is actually trying to say, quite rightly in a lot of instances, is you shouldn't get away with that. And you should be written off, because that bad thing is so bad that you should no longer be able to participate in the professional context under which your abuse occurred.
Yeah, and I get where they're coming from. I just think there may need at some point, and Lord knows there have been so many bad people doing bad things to women, particularly in Hollywood, but let's face it, it's not just Hollywood. It's anyone working. It gets a lot more desperate down in minimum wage jobs than it does for Hollywood starlets earning
definitely
millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And it's not just a male-female thing.
I mean, having said that, it's not really appropriate to rate abuses on...
No, I'm not rating abuses. I'm just saying...
I'm just saying, well, probably what I'm saying is that's not what's happening here.
But I would say that the owner of a 7-Eleven who treats their staff horribly might, I don't know, donate enormously to charity and play the piano really well, and have some other redeeming factors that might not make up for the bad things they do, but they are still a study in grey and not a study in black and white. Yeah,
but I know, I agree what you're saying, but that's not kind of the question that's being asked.
We don't really have the answers. We just know we're not watching House of Cards 36.
We're really messed up by it. We can't handle it.
I think in general people need to talk seriously about these issues more, and fundamentally the people with all the money make all the rules in our society, so whatever we decide doesn't really matter that much anyway. But we're not watching House of Cards Season 6.
No.
Because I'm watching Doctor Who.
For some reason, I'm still watching Woody Allen movies, because it's just sentimental.
When was the last time you actually watched one?
Sometimes I pop them on when I'm, like, sort of cleaning, because I find them weirdly comforting.
Annie Hall is a great movie.
Annie Hall is a really, really good movie. But you watch it and you're like...
That's a creepy old man. He was a creepy old man even when he was a young man. Okay, on that note, we're going to say goodbye. The email is gmtrpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to let Sheridan know why she's wrong and we should watch House of Cards Season 6.
Is that must be why we're not receiving any emails. Because I'm never
wrong.
wrong.
Yeah, there you go. Because if you were wrong just once, everyone will want to tell you about it. Or obviously you can comment on our YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and on our website, which one way or another you've received this podcast through. So thanks very much. And Tuesday is the new recording time. That's Australian time for this podcast, because Sheridan decided unilaterally she preferred it on Tuesdays. So if you disagree with her, email gmtrpodcast@gmail.com, care of Sheridan, and she'll take your emails. Okay, good night.
Bye.